background about our campus conversations. In the fall of 2020, Ohio University Southern began an ongoing conversation about race. The University Southern Council on Diversity and Inclusion coordinated these campus conversations as a way to serve as a catalyst for change. The series addresses race from many different perspectives, and through open and honest civil dialogue, we can hear and learn from one another. Now, we don't expect to resolve the issues around race in 1 hour, but we do believe that together we can begin paving a path forward. And today's campus conversation features the Reverend William Klusmeyer, Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of West Virginia. And I learned about Bishop Klusmeyer from a feature article on him in the Herald Dispatch. I think it was in August of 21, I think it was. In that article, he spoke about the steps to end racism. And I knew then that we had to have him on campus to share with us his thoughts and his experiences and to kind of guide us in how we can move forward. So Bishop Klusmeyer, thank you for joining us this afternoon. Before we begin, I do want to remind everyone that the chat is open, so please feel free to add questions or comments to the chat. We will have a Q&A toward the end of the conversation. And also, this session is being recorded. We have some folks who could not be with us today, but they did want to see the session, so we want to make sure we make that available to them. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Bishop Klusmeyer to begin the conversation.
Well, thank you very much. Excuse me, I'm not sure what all I have to bring to the table. I can tell you a lot of my experience as to where I've come from and where I've been and where it's taken me. A large part of it, just brief background, I grew up, where I was born on Long Island, lived in Norwalk, Connecticut for a couple of years, moved to the western suburbs of Chicago, and then went to seminary in New York City, went out to Northwest Illinois for 10 years, back into the suburbs of Chicago for 11, and I've been in West Virginia for just over 20 years. I would say I've had something of a diverse track record here. In recent years, and I know this is not where I really want to go, but I will say when I was in Connecticut, we lived in Norwalk. I was there for, I think, second, third, and part of fourth grade. It was a new school, Naramake was the name of it. Being a kid, I didn't know any better. I didn't know any different. But every day, I walked to school, but every day there was always an announcement that the bus to Rudner Court was either running on schedule or running late. Probably about at least a third of my class got on the bus to go to Rudner Court. Never thought much about it. We played after school, in the schoolyard, or they'd walk to my house. I've looked up Rudner Court now, and Rudner Court in around Norwalk, Connecticut, has some of the highest violence. It's predominantly an African-American housing project. But when I was a kid, I didn't know any different. They were my friends. What did I know? And so it's just a reminder to me that racial discrimination, racial choosing is not innate. It was just friends next to me. And it's not until you grow up, and I will say we are taught racial bias at some level. And it's, I'll say it's insidious. There's no question about it. It's destructive. What we came to here, and West Virginia is a place that's predominantly, and I think I saw some report, we are the highest white population, or the lowest non-white population in the 50 states. And so it's a pretty, I'll say, awkward living arrangement. A number of years ago, someone sent me, forwarded an email that I still have on my computer. It was forwarded to me by a parishioner in the diocese. And it was an email that said that it was racist. There was no question about it. The person who had sent it originally was a school administrator, and so I took it to the school superintendent just around the corner from my office, because I thought if one of my priests had done something like that, I'd sure want to know it, and they'd be in my office within 15 minutes. I mean, it's just wrong. So I took it to the superintendent. He looked at it, recognized the email address, and said he would take care of it. The next day, I got a phone call from that school administrator saying that I was propagating racism, and that she did not believe in racism. She was not a racist, and that I was going to get sued by her for defamation of character. I will be honest and say I don't take any of those things ever lightly. So I called our insurance company, and my insurance adjuster for the Church Insurance Corporation said, let's take this to court. I'd love to see the reaction when you say, did you send this email? Yes. And you're calling the bishop a racist? And read it, it'd be case closed. But unfortunately, that's not the lone incident. I've been accused of perpetuating racism. If I would just if I would forget about it, it would all go away. So, we live in a world in which it is very easy to point fingers elsewhere and claim I'm not, but you must be. And if you cause any problems, obviously you're the problem. So that sort of brought up a whole lot of issues. And then with that, I've known in the Episcopal Church, I don't throw many things away. And so I go through old files and hey, this is just one small file. But it's got this kind of stuff in it. I found old letter. The bishops of the Episcopal Church meet regularly and often send out letters to the church on important issues. In 1994, the bishops sent out a letter called On the Sin of Racism. It was edited and rewritten in 1996, and it could have been written last week. And I'm a cradle Episcopalian. I love the Episcopal Church, but I will say we have talked an awful lot. We've given a lot of speeches. We have not cleaned up our own house at all. So if you go to House of Bishops meeting or to the Episcopal Church, it could be 2022 or it could be 1994 again. That being said, we've had a group in the diocese that's been working on this, and we came up with 7 steps. And Robert, that's what you were talking about in the introduction. And I'll say at one level, it's not rocket science, but it is making a sincere attempt and recognizing our realities in the world. So the first thing is in the church, this was written to the Diocese of West Virginia, is to have a conversation within the church and to see how you can make a positive difference regarding race relations. I mean, I think you could substitute almost any topic in there. We should have a study. We need to just talk about it and be better informed. Again, this school administrator, I would love to have had a conversation with her. Let's talk about it. Where is she coming from? Why? What's happened in her life? What's happened in my life? we need to have we need to engage the government and local authorities to advocate for legal and legal reforms and judicial reforms, for housing, for education, for healthcare, for policing, and all sorts of other social issues. We just need to engage those that have the authority to make some differences. Now, I know you pass a law and it's not going to change a lot of people's attitudes. I don't expect this to take place overnight, but you got to take the first step. We have to say certain things are wrong, and then they won't be tolerated, which also takes us to, we have to call out people when they do something wrong, when they've done some insulting, even a minute insult that might be racially motivated, or to speak out against larger acts of prejudice. You know, for many people, it's easy to just bow your head and walk away. It takes courage. It takes courage to stand up and just say, excuse me, what you just said is offensive. You don't even have to get mad about it. Again, it could open up the door for an engagement of conversation to find out again where we're coming from. But to ignore it perpetuates the problem. So let's not ignore the realities that we see. We've all seen it. And finally, and I remember this, I was the rector of a parish in Wheaton, Illinois, western suburbs. And we had the Wheaton Ministerial Association gathered, and it was multicultural, multiracial, and we talked. And I have to admit, one of the first things that came out was we looked around the room and said, in this group, who do you hang out with? And the truth was, everybody I hung out with looked pretty much like me. And so the question came up, why aren't I hanging out with people of different racial backgrounds? And some of it was just, it was easy, it was simple, it was convenient. But that opened up a few doors. And there was a pastor from one of the Baptist church, an independent Baptist church. We ended up having numerous conversations about a lot of things. We ended up joining hands when the Ku Klux Klan walked into Wheaton, Illinois. We got on the radio, we got together. We were somewhat inseparable, but not just because of the issue. We had actually become friends. And so I was telling somebody the other day about this. He became a very, very, not just a very good friend, but we played a lot of racquetball together. And that's something I think probably before those meetings, we probably never would have done that. And so what one of the other steps is to look around our various groupings, or nowadays I guess we call them pods. Look around and find someone that does not look like us, and engage them in a conversation. Get to know them, get to know who they are, and let them get to know you. I guarantee you, your life will be expanded, your experiences will be enriched, and life will be much better. Again, we won't get this done tomorrow, but we've got to take that step one step at a time to broaden our horizons, our understandings, and our lives. So that's, it's something I think somewhat simple, but it ought to be life-shattering. And then I go back to my tradition of the Episcopal Church. Boy, I can go back to a lot of stories. I don't know how much you want to hear about this. we have a group in the Episcopal Church. Every diocese has one, and I was in the Diocese of Chicago, and it's called the Commission on Ministry. And if you think you're being called to be ordained, at some point you're going to show up in front of this commission, and it's 15, 16 people. It's not a huge group, and I'd been serving on it for a number of years, and people of all walks of life came in, and some of them were 21 and some of them were 55, and we asked sort of silly questions, and maybe you get past, maybe you don't. And I remember one time a young man, African-American gentleman, came into the room, sat down, and answered all sorts of questions, the same questions everybody else was asked. And then suddenly somebody said, well, what do we have to do? What are you going to do to bring the African-American community into the Episcopal Church? What are you going to do this? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? And I looked at the guy, and I have to admit, I was too young, and he was much older than I, so I didn't say anything. But later, the young man got up and left, and I said, you don't ask that question of anybody else. All the white people that have come in this room, you've never asked them that question. You've never asked them, what are you going to do to bring more white people in? You've never asked them what you're going to do to bring Asians in. You didn't ever ask them to be. And he said, well, but he's the one that's going to do it. And I just remember that. I remember that conversation vividly, that suddenly we were going to dump everything on this one individual to fix the church. And nowhere in there was there the conversation about who do we know, who are we talking to, how are we going to invite, what will the new church look like if we brought in all God's people. So, and then I'm going to stop at this point and just say, we have certain questions that we ask everybody when they join the church. And the last two are, will you seek and serve Christ in all persons, loving your neighbor as yourself? How about that one for a bomb? And the second one is, will you strive for justice and peace among all people and respect the dignity of every human being? I keep telling my clergy, and I keep telling people, these are questions, you type them up, put them on your refrigerator, and you promise to live by those every day. So that's the chance to change this world.
Well, we want to open it up for some questions too. So if you want to, we're a small group right now. So if you want to speak up, that's fine as well. But I do have a couple questions to get us started, Bishop.
Yes, sir.
What you're passionate about this, and I've read some articles about some of the things that you've done in the church, as far as you've commissioned a committee to look at. You as one of the areas that you brought different faiths together to open the 2019 session of the West Virginia legislature. So number one, where does that passion come from for this issue? And number two, how, particularly with the legislature, how did that go, bringing different faiths together? Because we have that battle within our own communities. When you start bringing diverse faiths together, that there's a battle within that as well. So
that in particular, one of my priests here in Charleston wanted to open up or to get into refugee resettlement, and it was larger than her parish could do. And so she opened it up and asked interfaith partners, and the Episcopal Church has a legitimate group that works with migration ministries. And I have to say, I mean, as I'm looking out my window here, I can see the synagogue across the street, kitty corner from across the street. I have to admit, I had never met the rabbi, but he got involved. He came over here for a meeting about the refugees. And I love telling this story. We were going around the table and we were introducing ourselves because a number of people had not met each other. And he looked at me, and it was the year that the Chicago Cubs were going to win the World Series. And so he heard that I had come from the Chicagoland area, and he said, you must be really happy. And I said, sir, I'm a New York Mets fan. And he kind of looked surprised, and he said, why is that? And I said, well, my first major league game was at the Polo Grounds in New York. And he said, I'm a Mets fan. So immediately we had something together. And then we start talking, and he says something about his comic book collection. And I said, I got a comic book collection. Now, I will say the difference is he collected them. I read mine. So mine are tattered. But we had many of the same. And he just looked and he said, are you sure you're not my brother? And that, again, just sort of opened up. So the two of us have become very close friends, very good friends. And then every so often, and it used to be a couple of times a year, I got invited, as do other religious leaders, to open sessions at the Capitol, which is just a half a block away. The last time I was there by myself, I led a prayer, which I believe got me uninvited from then on. The prayer, without going into the whole thing, but it said, we pray to the God who is the God of the rich, the poor, Main Street, Wall Street, blacks, whites, gay, straight. I think that's what knocked me out of the water here. Men, women, Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, Islamic, you name it. And that was it. And I wasn't invited back for at least another year or year and a half. And so I got the invitation, and I thought, I don't know how often the Islamic community is invited, and I don't know how often Rabbi is invited. So I called them and asked if they would join me. And they said yes, and we talked about what kind of prayer. And I said, I got this prayer right here. We made minor alterations, and the three of us walked in together, and we prayed that prayer together, taking, each person taking a different line. One senator, in the midst of it, right when we said, God of the gays and God of the straights, sat down, and obviously did not participate or like our sermon or our prayer. We were invited back the following year. So the three of us went with exactly the same prayer. But before we got to the podium, there was another group of legislators who circled around each other. And obviously they were going to pray the real prayer, because ours was not going to be valid, I guess. And so we prayed. And the three of us have been good friends. And I will say part of my issue or request to invite them is, we're praying to the same God, the God of all creation. It's not about, God doesn't care about this or God cares about everything. And as bad as the rhetoric is around the country, all three Abrahamic faiths are faiths of peace and love. That's who all of us were supposed to be, and we practice that. Yes, every group will get a bad name because of bad actors. But I think we were able to stand up and say, God loves all of us together, and there's no difference. And anyway, yeah.
And I've had these conversations. If anyone has any questions, please. But I've had these conversations with other. I'm a believer as well, and I had these conversations with other believers, and I'm amazed at some of the hatred coming from folks who profess to to be a faith. I'm amazed by that. And it hurts me to my core. And Dr. McKenzie and I, she's on here now, we discuss this all the time. And we know, we agree with you, it's about conversations, engaging people, having those conversations. So going through this process and with you're passionate about this, what's the best way to begin engaging people and having this dialogue and having these kind of conversations? What have you found that's worked for you?
Well, before I move to that, let me say our presiding bishop, Michael Curry, the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church, I know he uses the language or the statement, and I've seen it in other churches that say, if it's not of love, it's not of God. Or if it's not about love, it's not about God. That is the doctrine of creation. That is the basic tenet of everything Christianity and other faiths come from, that God created because God loves, and that's just, you throw your hands up and say, that's all you can say. How does one engage it? I think, it is uncomfortable for me, but to go to a strange place that I may not know, what would it look like? Well, I was saying this the other day. Years ago, I was asked to help the new bishop in the Virgin Islands. And so I went down to visit with him and to meet people with whom he worked. And I was at his diocesan convention. And I sat up on the dais with him and his chancellor, his lawyer, and other leaders of the diocese. And I got to tell you, I looked out, and the thing that stood out to me was I was the only white face in the room. I have never been in that situation before. I mean, there was nobody except me with a white face. And I noticed, I noticed that real quickly. And so the rest of that time I spent getting to meet people, going from table to table at lunches and whatever. So I would say the first thing is we got to step out of our comfort zone. Just get out of it. And there's so much that we are just, whether it's for Episcopalians, whether it's evangelism, talking about our faith, I'd rather chew on a bunch of pennies right now, but we need to step out and, for somebody like me, I would say, go to a different church. There are many African-American churches, CME, AME churches. I guarantee you they would recognize me as a visitor more than many Episcopal churches would. And that would be a good thing.
Questions? Any other questions? This is good.
I have a question. It sort of follows on what you said. Robert and I do these diversity trainings, initiatives all year long. And yeah, we step outside of our comfort zone and we encourage people to, but how do we get the people who we really want to connect with, who we want to hear and learn about difference and appreciate difference, even if you don't agree with it, but at least recognize different as not evil? How do we get to those conversations?
Boy, if I had that perfect answer, I'd write my book and I'd retire, man. I'd be done.
I'm counting on you to have that perfect answer.
The one thing I recognize is if I'll put it this way, if life is a circle or is an onion,
Mm-hmm.
You can't go from the outer layer to the inner layer like that.
Right.
You got to go, layer by layer. And so the best, I think what you can do is maybe get an early seeker to be able to engage someone who hasn't even thought about seeking yet
Mhm.
and bring them to that first level. And then if that person can engage with somebody in the third level and then the fourth level and find out that, you know, the world's not going to explode.
Right.
And I'm not going to die of a heart attack. Now I may get nervous,
Mhm.
but you know what? I learn most things when I'm in an uncomfortable place. You know,
But okay, so ever
Yeah.
heard the phrase preaching to the choir?
oh yeah, I've done that a few times.
I feel like we do that a lot. The people we get to come to these events are the same people. So how can we stop just preaching to the choir? How can we get other people to engage with us? I think that's our goal, right, Robert, is to get more engagement, even from people who wouldn't normally engage. How can we initiate those kinds of even small conversations here or there, but how can we do that? I want an easy
Boy.
fix, but I know there's no easy fix. But I want you
Yeah.
to give me an easy fix.
You know, I mean, it is preaching to the choir, and you're right. I mean, you know, the people who are in the audience right now are the people who are already engaged in this. There's no question about that. You know, I'm in my last year. I'm going to retire at the end of the year, or toward the end of this year, and I keep thinking about what's next. And one of the things, God, boy, I shouldn't say this. You're not going to send this to the presiding bishop, are you?
No.
You know, I need my pension at some point. But I get frustrated with the institution. And what I'd love to do is throw the buildings out and just have what the early church was about was house churches. You know, invite people in and to some degree it's, you know, you just invite a friend, you bring your boyfriend, your husband, your spouse, whatever, just come on in and, you know, we'll just sit around. And that's part of what they call the emerging church. But I also think about, I guess I would say modern society. I don't even know. Is Jay Leno still on the, no, he's not on anymore, is he?
No.
But, you know, in the evening, he used to go out and stand on the corner and ask people dumb questions.
Mm.
You know, now he got paid a lot of money to do it, but, you know, what would prevent us from just going up and saying, you know, hey, what do you think about? Or have you ever?
Mhm.
You know, there's some people I know have what they've been calling it either theology on tap or beer and Bible or scotch and scripture. You know, go out to a bar and just sit down and put a sign and say, talk to me about anything. I don't know how that works. I haven't done that yet, but again, it's I don't know. A friend of mine gave me a story one time that said the preacher got up and made everybody upset and people left, and next week people left, and next week people left. And he said he got it down to 4 people. The church got down to 4 people. And the 4 people said, you know what? Next week I'm going to invite a friend. And the next week there were 8 people. And a couple of weeks later, those 8 people invited 8 people. So I guess I would say, I mean, it's the simple answer is we just have to invite someone, whether we know them or not. You know, I probably won't invite a complete stranger, but I would invite somebody that I've engaged and say, come with me. I guess sort of, I mean, being a bishop, I got to say, sort of like what the disciples did and said to people, you know, come see what we found. But now I'm just jabbering, so you got me thinking.
That's good.
I'm thinking too, and that's what you did for me today. So I don't know. Dr. Nicole Hannah Jones, who did the 1619 project, she recently spoke, and she didn't name the organization because when they announced that she was going to speak, there were a lot of people who sent in messages. They didn't want her there. She was not what Dr. King talked about, and he was blah blah blah. So she did her speech in a way that she pulled quotes from Dr. King. And so at the beginning, all she read were his quotes, but she changed the word Negro to Black, so it would be obvious that these were his words. And then she kind of flipped the script and said, by the way, these are Dr. King's words. These are not my words. So I want you to understand that what I'm saying today is what he said. But what you're doing is you're taking what he said and whitewashing it and making it so that it's more palatable to you. So you need to read his complete words. So you're making me think about things like that because I want to know how can we make it more palatable? Because once we get you in the door, I think people are going to be more receptive, but how can we make it more palatable? So I know you don't have an answer, but it's just, you got me thinking today. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And I understand that. I mean, it's amazing. You can hear words that have been tweaked just a little bit. And you think, again, like that, the House of Bishops pastoral letter from 1994. I read that today, and it's as relevant today as it was back then. And I didn't have to tweak any words. But we are quick to, I'll say we're quick to judge, and we're quick to excuse things away. And again, I would say it's, I guess I would say like with my rabbi, I'm calling him my rabbi, with my rabbi, if we hadn't had that time sitting around the table right now or back then, he'd still be standing over there and I'd still be sitting over here, and I wouldn't even recognize him when he walked down the street. I see him almost every day. He goes down and walks his daughter's dog. So, I mean, I see him, but in that case, it was almost a chance encounter. And, who would have known he was a Mets fan, But once we found that, we've been able to engage on a lot of things. And I'll say that's opened me up. The other rabbi in town, he and I have become friends. As a rabbi up in Wheeling, we've become not so much friends because we don't see each other that often, but we know who we are and we know where we're coming from, and we support each other in the ministries. So I think it's, but ultimately, I guess I would say some of it we have to leave up to chance, but the answer is we can't leave it up to chance because chance hasn't gotten us through yet. I remember sitting, I hadn't been here very long, and I went to a church in the coal fields, and there was one young lady in the back of the church, an African-American woman, and she was the only African-American in the church. And we got to talking, and I made the comment that in West Virginia, the Episcopal Church had always been the church of the bosses. That's our history. We were the a church of the coal mine owners, the managers, the foremen. I don't think a whole lot of Episcopalians went into the coal mines. But I'll tell you, there aren't a whole lot of coal mine bosses floating around West Virginia anymore. And yet we continue to think that we're the church of the bosses. And we got to change that. And we have got to talk to, I guess I'll just say, talk to our neighbors and get to know them, and then go back to those questions I asked. Will you respect the dignity of every human being, and will you strive for justice and peace among all people?
As I listen to you, what keeps coming to my mind is what are people afraid of? What is the fear that stops us from? We've been dealing with these same issues around race for generations, generation after generation. And a friend of mine once said he's so tired of having to deal with it, and he happens to be white. And I said the same thing. I'm tired of dealing with it too. When are we going to do something about it? And so, what is the fear that people have of bridging this divide? It's been generations, and so I'm still trying to figure that out.
Well, that's a great question. I think there are several answers depending on where people are. I think some of it is fear of losing power. That's the core of racism, isn't it? I mean, that I have power over you, and if I suddenly, I don't even want to say relinquish some of that, but if I suddenly get to know you, I can't have power. I think that's probably the biggest part. And then I think it's whether it's the fear, just the fear of the unknown, which is it's throughout our world, throughout our lives. But I think for some people, and this is my own projection, I guess, is, you sit down at 6:30 every evening and you watch the network news, and you hear about all these race issues and how this African-American man out in Los Angeles did this to somebody. And then what do? You lump them all together. And I don't think I can say this word. I'll just say that's baloney. I'll just say it that way. That way I can clean it up, right? I can use that word. That has no business. The same thing could be said about the white guy in Spokane, Washington, for all I know. The truth is, I need to get to know you. And that's all. That's where it starts. Just one person at a time. And again, it's like what I said going back, who do we hang around with? Can I open my circle of friends by one person? I did it when I was a kid with absolutely no qualms. I'll tell you, the one, just as an aside, as I said, I don't throw many things out. So I've got my yearbooks and my school pictures, but I've got them from like 6th, 7th, and 8th, because before that, and in Norwalk, we didn't have school pictures. So I don't remember any of my friends from that year, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade, except a couple of kids. And one of them was a young lady, Marilyn Black. She was African-American. She did not live in Rudner Court. She lived around the corner from us. And we used to play all the time. And you know what? I wish I knew where she was today. Yeah. I'm sorry. I just meander on thoughts like this.
These are informal conversations. This is how we grow. So this is what these conversations are about. Are there other comments or questions? Because I could go on and on and on. So anyone else?
Either I'm not making sense or I don't know what.
No, I think it's been very good. So, well, I want to thank you for being here. Any final thoughts? Any final giving us a charge after this event? Any charge that you want to give to us to go out and change the world?
Robert, I think someone was going to comment or ask.
Did they comment?
Yeah.
Was it Vila?
I didn't see anything.
Oh, I was just going to say thank you first, Robert and Teresa, for allowing me to continue to be a part of your campus, even though I'm not. I truly appreciate it. I just wanted to say, this was. I first, I apologize for not being on camera, but I'm working as I'm listening. But I think that this information was very helpful, and I would love to see more of this type of dialogue, because this is real. This is real talk. And I think, for me, it makes me think, as a person who has gone through very recently, very intentional acts of discrimination and racism. It helps me to grow, and it helps me to validate who I am and those and others, as well as the negative behaviors and actions of those who created harm towards me. But I think you're right. It's about power and control. It's the fear of losing that power and that control. And I think that these are just the very basic human skills that we should have, as far as being able to talk to one another. We don't have to agree. We just have to listen and respect. And I think that that's just the very basic expectation. I don't want power and control, but for some reason others do. And that's what we're down to. So I think, thank you for having these types of conversations. And I hope that they continue, because this is how we can help fight it. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Anything else in the chat? All right. Bishop, thank you so much for being a part of this. Again, do you want to give us a charge to go out and fight with? Something that's some kind of guard we could put on to go out there into the world?
Well, I would say for all of us, one is, and Vila, thank you. We have to be willing to give up our power and control, and just go out into the world as God sent us out, just who we are. And the second is, I'll go back to my prayer book and say, love one another as God loved us. Seek and serve Christ in all persons. Love our neighbors as ourselves, regardless. It doesn't say, only if. And respect the dignity of absolutely every person. And again, I'd say put that on your refrigerator wall or door, and live those statements. It is gonna happen. I know it's gonna happen. Unfortunately, it may not happen in my lifetime. I know it's not gonna happen this week. But all I can do, and all any of us can do, is one step, one person at a time, and make that promise. And I admit, I get up in the morning and I promise myself and God that I'm going to be the best person I can be, and I'm going to walk the straight and narrow path. And I guarantee you, by the time I've come down from my first Diet Coke, I've broken 10 commandments, and But the good news is I can pick myself up, and I can ask for forgiveness and take another step. And that goes back to one of the 7 steps, is to say, call out the bad behavior. And it could be in myself. Admit it, say I'm sorry, and go back again. And if it's not mine, if it's somebody else's, have the strength to just say, that's not right. Let's be nice to each other and go from there.
Absolutely. All right. You did say one other thing you did when you talked about being the only white person in was a congregation. I thought about all the times when I walked into, whether it's a classroom or whether it's a meeting, I'm the only one in there. And I know, and for me, it is, I'm not walking in as Robert by himself. I'm walking in because I realize that other people will be judged. Other people look like me will be judged by my actions, my reactions, all of that. So that's a powerful thing. That is powerful. Yeah. So, all right. Anyone else before we go ahead? Bishop.
No. I was just agreeing wholeheartedly.
All right, everyone. Thank you. As we always do, if you have other topics, other things, other discussions around race that you'd like us to bring, these campus conversations are informal, and we want to. This is how we break it down. I think this is how we break down the barriers Bishop has given us the charge, and I think this is how we move forward by having these kind of conversations. So again, thank you, Bishop Klusmeyer,
Thank
for
you.
being here, and thank all of you for participating. Have a great day.
Thank you very much.